How did the Hebrews turn white? Of course they didn't really, just in the imaginations, and then the histories of white people, who for probably practical reasons, decided that Hebrews, and also the blacks who originally lived in the countries that they took over, should all become white for posterity's sake. Seeing as how it only takes 3 generations to turn a black person into a white person. No doubt there came a time when, as Europe's formerly biracial populations became more homogeneously white people decided that they could no longer acknowledge that all that they knew and had was derived from the minds and labors of black people, even down to their religious beliefs. The logic no doubt being that whites could not progress to their full potential if they were always looking up to blacks as the personification of knowledge and wisdom. So a change had to be made, and at some point, by somebody, that change began. Of course, we have no way of knowing when this process of whitenizing blacks began, or who did it, or where it was first done. But we do have some materials by which we can track the process, somewhat. But first, let us go back to see what Hebrews really looked like. The earliest authentic pictures of real Hebrews that we have date back to before Christ. They are Assyrian reliefs showing Hebrews, and others that they conquered, in pictorial scenes detailing the battles fought, with associated text. These reliefs decorated Assyrian palaces, and were no doubt used to gloat over their conquest of the Hebrews and others. Here we are using pictures of Assyrian King Shalmaneser III's Black Obelisk, 858 BC. Assyrian King Tiglath-Pileser III's reliefs of his conquest of a city near the Sea of Galilee, 730 BC. Assyrian King Sennacherib's reliefs of the conquest of the Judean city of Lachish, 701 BC. The 4 pictures below are from those Assyrian reliefs. Today, many black men still favor the short hair and beard of some Hebrews. Let us proceed then, with our pictorial essay of how Jesus, and thus, the Hebrews turned white. The Alexamenos graffito, dating from c. 200 AD or earlier, is an interesting early parody of Christianity. This early graffito, wall scratching, singular of graffiti, was discovered in 1857 in a guardroom on Palatine Hill near the Circus Maximus in Rome, and is now in the Palatine Antiquarian Museum. The drawing shows a man with an ass's head being crucified, to which a youth is raising his hand as if in prayer. The text in Greek reads, Ale, Zamenos, Sebat, Theon, which means, Alexamenos worships his God. Before Christianity, the Hebrews had already been charged with worshipping an ass. This was probably the basis of this accusation being directed at Christianity. 8/14, 1:31 p.m. Zain al-Abedin. This wall painting, depicting the healing of the paralytic, is the earliest known representation of Jesus, dating from about 235 AD. The painting was found in 1921 on the left-hand wall of the baptismal chamber of the house church at Dura Europo on the Euphrates River in modern Syria. It is now part of the Dura Europo collection at the Yale University Gallery of Fine Arts. This fresco of the Good Shepherd was found on the ceiling of the vault of Lucina in the Catacomb of Calixtus in Rome. The construction of the vault itself has been dated to the second half of the 2nd century, but the use of the red and green lines to divide the space, similar to the chambers under San Sebastiano, has suggested the first half or middle of the 3rd century for this fresco. The image of Jesus as the Good Shepherd was an especially popular motif in the early Christian centuries. It was based on several biblical passages, including the 23rd Psalm and sayings of Jesus, and is also an adaptation of a popular pagan image. This fresco of Christ among the Apostles is in an arcosolium of the crypt of Ampliatus in the catacombs of Saint Domitilla in Rome. The catacombs of Domitilla date from the 2nd through 4th centuries. According to W. F. Volbuck, the extent to which the type of the apostolic group has been developed suggests a 4th century origin for this particular fresco. The city of Dura Europo was founded in 303 BC by the Seleucids on the intersection of an east-west trade route and the trade route along the Euphrates. The new city controlled the river crossing on the route between his newly founded cities of Antioch and Seleucia on the Tigris. It is located near the village of Selhai, in today's Syria. The city is extremely important for archaeological reasons, as it was abandoned after its conquest in 257, and nothing was built over it, and no later building programs obscured the architectonic features of the ancient city. Its location on the edge of contending empires made for a commingling of cultural traditions, much of which was preserved under the city's ruins. Some remarkable finds have been brought to light, including numerous temples, wall decorations, inscriptions, military equipment, tombs, and even dramatic evidence of the Sasanian siege during the Imperial Roman period, which led to the site's abandonment. The Jewish synagogue, located by the western wall between towers 18 and 19, the last phase of which was dated by an Aramaic inscription to 244. It is the best preserved of the many ancient synagogues of that era that have been uncovered by archaeologists. It was preserved, ironically, when it had to be infilled with earth to strengthen the city's fortifications against a Sasanian assault in 256. It was uncovered in 1932 by Clark Hopkins, who found that it contains a forecourt and house of assembly with frescoed walls depicting people and animals, and a Torah shrine in the western wall facing Jerusalem. At first, it was mistaken for a Greek temple. The synagogue paintings, the earliest continuous surviving biblical narrative cycle, are conserved at Damascus, Syria. Byzantine Emperor Justinian II 669–711, was the last Byzantine emperor of the Heraclian dynasty, reigning from 685 to 695 and again from 705 to 711. Justinian II generated enormous opposition to his reign, and it resulted in his deposition in 695 in a popular uprising, and he only returned to the throne in 705 with the help of a Bulgar and Slav army. His second reign was even more despotic than the first, and it too saw his eventual overthrow in 711, abandoned by his army who turned on him before killing him. The David Garaja Monastery, the modern country of Georgia in the Caucasus region of the former Soviet Union, the place where European albinos tell themselves and the world that they are from. They call themselves Caucasians, is the location of one of the oldest black kingdoms in Europe, Colchis. According to Greek mythology, Colchis was a fabulously wealthy land situated on the mysterious periphery of the heroic world. Here in the sacred grove of the war god Ares, King Aetes hung the golden fleece until it was seized by Jason and the Argonauts. Colchis was also the land where the mythological Prometheus was punished by being chained to a mountain while an eagle ate at his liver, for revealing to humanity the secret of fire. The Amazons also were said to be from Colchis. The main mythical characters from Colchis are Aetes, Medea, Absyrtus, Chalciope, Circe, Idaea, Pasiphae. In about 730 BC, Colchis was overrun by the white Kurgan tribes called Cimmerians and Scythians. But they appear to have done little permanent damage. In about 600 BC, the advanced economy of Colchis soon attracted the attention of the Milesian, white, Greeks in Anatolia, Turkey, who colonized the Colchian coast and established trading posts at Phasis, Jayanos, and Sukhumi. In about 580 BC, the kingdom came under the control of, probably by the dating, King Astyages of the Median Empire, which would soon become part of the First Persian Empire under Cyrus II, the Great. The Sasanian was the Second Persian Empire. Herodotus on Colchis, circa 440 BC. 2.104 There can be no doubt that the Colchians are an Egyptian race. Before I heard any mention of the fact from others, I had remarked it myself. After the thought had struck me, I made inquiries on the subject both in Colchis and in Egypt, and I found that the Colchians had a more distinct recollection of the Egyptians than the Egyptians had of them. Still, the Egyptians said that they believed the Colchians to be descended from the army of Sesostris. My own conjectures were founded, first, on the fact that they are black-skinned and have woolly hair, which certainly amounts to but little, since several other nations are so too, but further and more especially, on the circumstance that the Colchians, the Egyptians, and the Ethiopians, Nubians, are the only nations who have practiced circumcision from the earliest times. Sometime around the year 2 BC, both Pontus and Colchis were incorporated into the Roman province of Galatia. Soon the lowlands and coastal area of Colchis began to suffer raids by white tribes from the surrounding mountains, the Soans and Heniochi being the most powerful of them. After swearing allegiance to Rome, the white tribes were allowed to create their own kingdoms in Colchis, which enjoyed significant independence from Rome. Christianity began to spread in the early 1st century AD. Traditional accounts relate the event with Saint Andrew, Saint Simon the Zealot, and Saint Matata. However, the previous religious beliefs, like the Hellenistic, the local pagan and the Mithraic beliefs, would still be widespread until the 4th century AD. By about the 130s AD, the new kingdoms of Makelons, Heniochi, Agrisi, Apsilia, Abaskia, and Sanija had sprung up from south to north. The Goths, dwelling in the Crimea and looking for new homes, raided Colchis in 253 AD, but they were repulsed with the help of the Roman garrison of Pisunda. By the 3rd to 4th centuries AD, most of the local kingdoms and principalities had been subjugated by the Turkic, Lazic kings, and thereafter the country was generally referred to as Lazica. In the late 8th century AD, Colchis was attached to Abaskia, which in turn was incorporated into Russian Georgia. Blacks, however, are said to have survived in the area until the early 20th century. The David Garaja Monastery, Georgia. The David Garaja Monastery is a rock-hewn Georgian Orthodox monastery complex located in the Kakheti region of eastern Georgia, on the half-desert slopes of Mount Garaja, some 60-70 km southeast of Georgia's capital Tbilisi. The complex includes hundreds of cells, churches, chapels, refectories, and living quarters hollowed out of the rock face. Part of the complex is located in the Agstafa Rayon of Azerbaijan and has become subject to a border dispute between Georgia and Azerbaijan. The area is home to evidence of some of the oldest human habitations in the region. The monastery complex was founded in the 6th century by Saint David Garajli, one of the 13 Assyrian monks who arrived in the country at the same time. His disciples Dodo and Luciani expanded the original Lavra and founded 2 other monasteries known as Dodozerka, literally, the Horn of Dodo, and Natlizm Semeli, the Baptist. The monastery saw further development under the guidance of the 9th century Georgian Saint Ilarion. The convent was particularly patronized by the Georgian royal and noble families. The 12th century Georgian king Demetra I, the author of the famous Georgian hymn Thou Art a Vineyard, even chose David Garaja as a place of his confinement after he abdicated the throne. With the downfall of the Georgian monarchy, the monastery suffered a lengthy period of decline and devastation by the Mongol army, 1265, but was later restored by the Georgian kings. It survived the Safavid attack of 1615, when the monks were massacred and the monastery's unique manuscripts and important works of Georgian art destroyed, to be resurrected under Onupra Machudids, who was appointed Father Superior of David Garaja in 1690. After the violent Bolshevik takeover of Georgia in 1921, the monastery was closed down and remained uninhabited. In the years of the Soviet war in Afghanistan, the monastery's territory was used as a training ground for the Soviet military that inflicted damage to the unique cycle of murals in the monastery. Christ at the Second Coming, in the center of the apse mosaic is Christ standing on red clouds, representing the dawn, dressed in golden robes labeled with the monogram I. He holds the scroll of the law in his left hand. The Basilica of Santi Cosma e Damiano is one of the ancient churches of Rome called Tituli, of which cardinals are patrons as deacons. The cardinal deacon of the Titulus SS Cosmi et Damiani is Giovanni Celli. The basilica, devoted to the two Greek brothers, doctors, martyrs, and saints Cosmas and Damian, is located in the Forum of Vespasian, also known as the Forum of Peace. The Temple of Romulus was dedicated by Emperor Maxentius to his son Valerius Romulus, who died in 309 and was rendered divine honors. It is possible that the temple was in origin the temple of Iovis Stator or the one dedicated to Penates, and that Maxentius restored it before the rededication. The ancient Roman fabric was Christianized and dedicated to Sancti Cosma et Damiano in 527, when Theodoric the Great, king of the Ostrogoths, and his daughter Amalasuntha donated the library of the Forum of Peace, Bibliotheca Pacis, and a portion of the Temple of Romulus to Pope Felix IV. The Pope united the two buildings to create a basilica devoted to two Greek brothers and saints, Cosmas and Damian, in contrast with the ancient pagan cult of the two brothers Castor and Pollux, who had been worshipped in the nearby temple of Castor and Pollux. The apse was decorated with a Roman Byzantine mosaic, representing Aparo Usia, the second coming of Christ at the end of time. The bodies of Saints Mark and Marcellian were translated, perhaps in the 9th century, to this church, where they were rediscovered in 1583 during the reign of Pope Gregory XIII. In 1632, Pope Urban VIII ordered the restoration of the basilica. The works, projected by Orazio Toriani and directed by Luigi Iraguchi, raised the floor level 7 meters, bringing it equal with the Campo Vaccino, thus avoiding the infiltration of water. Also, a cloister was added. The old floor of the basilica is still visible in the lower church, which is actually the lower part of the first church. In 1947, the restorations of the imperial forums gave a new structure to the church. The old entrance, through the Temple of Romulus, was closed, and the temple restored to its original forms. With the Pantheon, the Temple of Romulus is the best preserved pagan temple in Rome. A new entrance was opened on the opposite side, on Via dei Fori Imperiali, whose arch gives access to the cloister, and through this to the side of the basilica. Jesus' appearance from behind locked doors. by Duccio-Dibaninsegna, 1308 AD. The Duccio-Dibaninsegna above, which still has a somewhat black-looking Jesus, and some likewise black-looking apostles, seems to mark the end of Black Jesus, and the beginnings of the total lie. No non-white depiction of Jesus is known to have been made after this time, by white people. Another fresco of Christ among the apostles is in an arcosolium of the crypt of Ampliatus in the catacombs of Saint Domitilla in Rome. Probably from a later time than the first fresco. Is this the beginning of the whitenization of black people? It may be that later artists felt that since this fresco didn't cause the artist to immediately burn in hell, it might be okay to paint Jesus as white. Santa Costanza Mosaic. Santa Costanza is a church in Rome, built under Emperor Constantine I and place of burial, mausoleum, of his daughters Constantina and Helena. Later, Constantina was venerated as saint, with the Italian name of Costanza, and the church was dedicated to her. The church was built under Constantine, probably by Constantinia, next to the cemetery of Sant'Agnese fuori le mura, where Saint Agnes, who allegedly had healed Constantina, was buried. After their deaths, Constantine's daughters Constantina and Helena were buried here. Since Constantina was venerated as saint, the mausoleum was consecrated as a church in 1254 by Pope Alexander IV. After the church was restored in 1620 by Cardinal Fabrizio Verli, Constantina's magnificent porphyry sarcophagus was moved to the Vatican museums. The church was originally a mausoleum. Dead Christ, Giovanni Bellini, 1460 AD Museum Poldi Pezzoli, Milan. The modern Jesus, the Roman historian Cornelius Tacitus, 56 to 118 AD, had these thoughts on the origins and customs of the Hebrews, as the Romans prepared to destroy Jerusalem. This is in the context of Titus Caesar, who had been selected by his father to complete the subjugation of Judea. Tacitus, History Book 5:1. Early in this year Titus Caesar, who had been selected by his father to complete the subjugation of Judea, and who had gained distinction as a soldier while both were still subjects, began to rise in power and reputation, as armies and provinces emulated each other in their attachment to him. The young man himself, anxious to be thought superior to his station, was ever displaying his gracefulness and his energy in war. By his courtesy and affability he called forth a willing obedience, and he often mixed with the common soldiers, while working or marching, without impairing his dignity as general. He found in Judea 3 legions, the 5th, the 10th, and the 15th, all old troops of Vespasian's. To these he added the 12th from Syria, and some men belonging to the 18th and 3rd, whom he had withdrawn from Alexandria. This force was accompanied by 20 cohorts of allied troops and 8 squadrons of cavalry, by the 2 kings Agrippa and Sohemius, by the auxiliary forces of King Antiochus, by a strong contingent of Arabs, who hated the Jews with the usual hatred of neighbors, and, lastly, by many persons brought from the capital and from Italy by private hopes of securing the yet unengaged affections of the prince. With this force Titus entered the enemy's territory, preserving strict order on his march, reconnoitering every spot, and always ready to give battle. At last he encamped near Jerusalem. 2. As I am about to relate the last days of a famous city, it seems appropriate to throw some light on its origin. Some say that the Jews were fugitives from the island of Crete, who settled on the nearest coast of Africa about the time when Saturn was driven from his throne by the power of Jupiter. Evidence of this is sought in the name. There is a famous mountain in Crete called Ida. The neighboring tribe, the Ethii, came to be called Judaei by a barbarous lengthening of the national name. Others assert that in the reign of Isis the overflowing population of Egypt, led by Hierosolumus and Judas, discharged itself into the neighboring countries. Many, again, say that they were a race of Ethiopian origin, who in the time of King Cepheus were driven by fear and hatred of their neighbors to seek a new dwelling place. Others describe them as an Assyrian horde who, not having sufficient territory, took possession of part of Egypt, and founded cities of their own in what is called the Hebrew country, lying on the borders of Syria. Others, again, assign a very distinguished origin to the Jews, alleging that they were the Solymi, a nation celebrated in the poems of Homer, who called the city which they founded Hierosolyma after their own name. Three most writers, however, agree in stating that once a disease, which horribly disfigured the body, broke out over Egypt, that King Bacchorus, seeking a remedy, consulted the oracle of Hammon, and was bidden to cleanse his realm, and to convey into some foreign land this race detested by the gods. The people, who had been collected after diligent search, finding themselves left in a desert, sat for the most part in a stupor of grief, till one of the exiles, Moses by name, warned them not to look for any relief from God or man, forsaken as they were of both, but to trust to themselves, taking for their heaven-sent leader that man who should first help them to be quit of their present misery. They agreed, and in utter ignorance began to advance at random. Nothing, however, distressed them so much as the scarcity of water, and they had sunk ready to perish in all directions over the plain, when a herd of wild asses was seen to retire from their pasture to a rock shaded by trees. Moses followed them, and, guided by the appearance of a grassy spot, discovered an abundant spring of water. This furnished relief. After a continuous journey for 6 days, on the 7th they possessed themselves of a country, from which they expelled the inhabitants, and in which they founded a city and a temple. For Moses, wishing to secure for the future his authority over the nation, gave them a novel form of worship, opposed to all that is practiced by other men. Things sacred with us, with them have no sanctity, while they allow what with us is forbidden. In their holy place they have consecrated an image of the animal by whose guidance they found deliverance from their long and thirsty wanderings. They slay the ram, seemingly in derision of Hammon, and they sacrifice the ox, because the Egyptians worship it as Apis. They abstain from swine's flesh, in consideration of what they suffered when they were infected by the leprosy to which this animal is liable. By their frequent fasts they still bear witness to the long hunger of former days, and the Jewish bread, made without leaven, is retained as a memorial of their hurried seizure of corn. We are told that the rest of the 7th day was adopted, because this day brought with it a termination of their toils. After a while the charm of indolence beguiled them into giving up the 7th year also to inaction. But others say that it is an observance in honor of Saturn, either from the primitive elements of their faith having been transmitted from the Ethii, who are said to have shared the flight of that god, and to have founded the race, or from the circumstance that of the 7 stars which rule the destinies of men Saturn moves in the highest orbit and with the mightiest power, and that many of the heavenly bodies complete their revolutions and courses in multiples of 7. 5. This worship, however introduced, is upheld by its antiquity. All their other customs, which are at once perverse and disgusting, owe their strength to their very badness. The most degraded out of other races, scorning their national beliefs, brought to them their contributions and presents. This augmented the wealth of the Jews, as also did the fact, that among themselves they are inflexibly honest and ever ready to shew compassion, though they regard the rest of mankind with all the hatred of enemies. They sit apart at meals, they sleep apart, and though, as a nation, they are singularly prone to lust, they abstain from intercourse with foreign women. Among themselves nothing is unlawful. Circumcision was adopted by them as a mark of difference from other men. Those who come over to their religion adopt the practice, and have this lesson first instilled into them, to despise all gods, to disown their country, and set at naught parents, children, and brethren. Still they provide for the increase of their numbers. It is a crime among them to kill any newly born infant. They hold that the souls of all who perish in battle or by the hands of the executioner are immortal. Hence a passion for propagating their race and a contempt for death. They are wont to bury rather than to burn their dead, following in this the Egyptian custom. They bestow the same care on the dead, and they hold the same belief about the lower world. Quite different is their faith about things divine. The Egyptians worship many animals and images of monstrous form. The Jews have purely mental conceptions of deity, as one in essence. They call those profane who make representations of God in human shape out of perishable materials. They believe that being to be supreme and eternal, neither capable of representation, nor of decay. They therefore do not allow any images to stand in their cities, much less in their temples. This flattery is not paid to their kings, nor this honor to our emperors. From the fact, however, that their priests used to chant to the music of flutes and cymbals, and to wear garlands of ivy, and that a golden vine was found in the temple, some have thought that they worshipped Father Liber, the conqueror of the East, though their institutions do not by any means harmonize with the theory, for Liber established a festive and cheerful worship, while the Jewish religion is tasteless and mean. But before the modern era of pathetic white racism, with its white fright of all things black, and black identity theft, where Hazar Turks are the new Hebrews, and Osman Turks are the new Berbers, Egyptians, Arabs, and Middle Easterners. Before every ancient black figure encountered in a museum or book was explained away as a Nubian Ethiopian, a slave, or a servant, all people knew Hebrews to be black people, and depicted them as black people.